Hi, welcome back, friend. If you're new here, simply welcome. I'm so glad you're here, but I'm especially glad that you're tuning in for this episode. I have Katelyn Workman of Katelyn Workman Photography joining me today, and I think that this is going to be such a great conversation surrounding posing and client experience with posing. Katelyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Because I feel like already in this episode, it's going to feel a little bit silly since we're both named Katelyn.
Right.
I feel like we were just talking about this, but it's almost like no different than me just talking to myself. It's like, hey, Katelyn. Like, hey, Katelyn. So why don't you go ahead and start and tell everybody a little bit about yourself? I feel like anytime that question's asked, like I'm immediately back in college and it's like syllabus day and the professor's like, let's go around the room and say a fun fact about yourself. I'm like, oh, is there anything interesting about me?
Yes, I think the same thing about my camp counselor days of like, oh,
yeah.
What's your favorite color and what's your hidden talent, you know?
I'm glad I'm not the only one who feels like that.
No, but I'm Katelyn, and I am a mom of 2 kids, and I'm a wedding photographer and an educator, and I don't have any hidden talents. I love being an entrepreneur. Anytime I am excited about something, it turns into a business, I think. So maybe that's a hidden talent. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm from a really small town in West Virginia and started my business to take pictures of our daughter, who was our foster daughter at the time. And then it just quickly grew into a business that we love.
I love that. And I'm from a very small town in Southwest Virginia. I think we were just talking about this too. It's not too far from each other.
Right.
But I love that you started with pictures of your daughter. That is so cute. I'm kind of similar, but with pictures of my sister. I just wanted to be like the friend with the camera, you know? So I never wanted a business. My mom was like, make some money while you're in college. I'm like, maybe.
Oh, well, thanks, Mom, for letting you know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was always very like entrepreneur minded. Like when I was in high school, I made and sold jewelry. I didn't make a lot of money, but like I made and sold jewelry, and then I sold tutu dresses, and then I sold like some dresses that was like a dot dot smile dresses. Anyways, but it was just like one thing after the other. So it doesn't surprise me that this is what I ended up doing, even though it wasn't my plan at all.
I feel like that could be like a conversation in and of itself.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Love it. Entrepreneurial beginnings. Love it. But today we are talking about posing, and I love this topic because I think it's so relatable for photographers, no matter what stage of business they're in, but especially if they're a bit newer probably, or haven't found their own posing workflow. This can really hit home. I remember when I had just gotten my first camera in high school, maybe even like a little bit before, like Pinterest was like all the rage. I had board after board. This was like before folder organization came to Pinterest. So it was just like one board. I think it was called like senior portraits, and it had like 500 pins, probably like of collages, not even just like single image. And anytime that I would go out with my sister, we would pull up that Pinterest board and recreate as many of those collages of those posts as possible. So I'm so glad that we're talking about this today, because I don't think that I'm the only person who's ever done that. So.
No, there are people that still do it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with scrolling Pinterest for inspo. Like we all do it. It's fun. But I found that when I was scrolling for inspo on Pinterest, I wasn't finding what I wanted. And so I would scroll and then I would think, well, I don't really like this. This isn't as natural or whatever. And so it was almost frustrating because you're going through pins and pins and pins, and I don't have time. Most people don't have time. So I think it's good to create your own system so you're not panicked and scrolling through Pinterest.
I love that. So I think you have some tips for us.
So many tips.
So many tips. Well, I mean, you have a whole course on this too, which we'll talk about later. So why don't we get started with the first one?
Sure. So just a little backstory of why I'm so passionate about posing. I actually got kind of thrown into teaching about it because I was at a conference 2 years ago and found out that one of my friends was sick, which the conference was 2 days away. And she was supposed to teach a breakout. She was sick. She wasn't going to be there. So I messaged the host and I was like, hey, I'll teach it, not even knowing what the breakout was on. It was on posing. And so I had very little time to prepare. But since then, that was about 2 years ago, I've really kind of dug deep into what makes a good posing system, and how can I equip photographers to go into their sessions with confidence. And it's just been really fun because I don't want people to do what you did and have to scroll on Pinterest.
Yeah.
So I think you mentioned how this affects your client experience. I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about. But if you show up at your session and you're like, okay, let me take your picture. And then you're like, wait a minute, let me go to my Pinterest. Then your client is going to feel super awkward.
Right.
And so it's our job to show up with confidence and to build their confidence. One way I think you can start doing this with posing is by creating connections with your couples, especially if they are more introverted, which is, I know, is a big thing we talk about on this podcast in particular. But if you just start taking their pictures right away and you're like, okay, here, do this crazy pose, let me have you spin around, then they're probably going to be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel really awkward. So we always start our session, and I'm sure you do this too, just by talking to them and having a conversation with them. And it sounds really silly, but that makes a big difference in your whole posing flow from there. So we really does. Yes. A tip for this too is if you can find a spot that you can kind of walk to the spot, I think that helps. So you're not just like standing there with your camera like, okay, tell me all about your life. But if your first location can be like, okay, we're walking and just kind of organically having conversation. This is easy if you are a wedding photographer because you can ask about how they met and you can ask about their wedding, things that they're excited about. If you're a senior photographer, I'm sure you can ask about what they're excited for senior year. But yeah, just start with having a conversation with them and getting to know them.
I love that because Devin and I, we go to like all of our engagement sessions, all of our weddings together. And we always tell our couples, like, we want this to feel like a double date.
That's perfect.
Yeah. So we love to start off with like conversations, get to know them. That way their posing isn't so awkward, right? Because there's nothing more awkward and weird than a stranger coming up and shoving a camera in your face, right?
Yes. Yes. And all of our couples say we're really awkward, even if they're not at all. They always think that they're really awkward, or they'll say, I'm sorry, I've never had professional photos done before. And so we have to reassure them, like, it's totally fine. You're not supposed to know what you're doing. But just creating those connection points in the beginning makes it so much easier.
Love that. I love that. And I love that you mentioned like some starting points for wedding photographers and like senior photographers to start having those conversations. Like as an introvert, sometimes those conversations don't naturally flow out of us. I am a huge proponent of having a game plan, like no matter what it is. Because as introverts, we're kind of detail oriented, right? So if we have a plan and we know what we want to talk about, or at least how to start that conversation, then it flows out of you a lot easier. So I love that you mentioned that too.
I have been so excited for this particular conversation because we function so differently. Even though we have the same name, we are like opposite ends of the spectrum because I'm so extroverted. And so I don't have a plan. Like I'm just kind of show up, wing it in life. And so I want to know how to better prepare people who are introverted. Something I included in my posing course is a list of 20 conversation starter prompts. And they're just things like, tell me about your wedding vision. How did you guys meet? Like all of the generic wedding things. Are there any conversation starters that you have on like your game plan that you start a session with?
Yeah. So obviously like all of the wedding, related stuff. Usually I always say people like talking about themselves if they're nervous and I can even say this as an introvert. So like my introverted couples are the same way. That's an easy little segue to talk about themselves. And then, also I'm sure you do this too, like any insecurities that they have, like anything that they're like super envisioning. And most of the time, just like one or two of those questions segues, into little tangents and that conversation just flows a bit naturally.
Yeah, for sure. There's a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's Dale Carnegie. It's like 200 years old. I'm not sure. But if you do have a hard time just kind of having conversations with people, it's a really good perspective. It just reminded me because you said people love to talk about themselves. And he gives the analogy in that book of this guy who's at a party and he asks all of these people about themselves. And then he leaves and everyone's like, hey, did you meet that really cool guy? But they didn't know anything about him. They didn't know his name, but they all loved him because he was very intentional with asking questions about them. So if you are struggling with that, that's definitely a good book recommendation. Just a side tangent.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm going to put that in the show notes.
Okay, thanks. But yeah, like Katelyn mentioned, also asking about insecurities. And this doesn't have to look like, hey, tell me what you're most insecure about. But I always share the example of my arms. I don't like the way that my arms look in photos. And this is just my own insecurity. My photographer can't do anything about that, but they can take note of that and pose me in a way that I feel most confident. We had a session where the photographer didn't ask that, which is fine. Not everyone asked that. But she posed me in a lot of ways where, I hate that this is audio and I can't show you guys, but just envision my arms right in the front. It's the focal point. And I don't like any of those photos. And I knew when I was having them taken that I wasn't going to like them. Yeah. And it just quickly lost that trust that I had with the photographer because I knew, okay, I'm not going to like this. I'm not going to like this. Which there were a lot of other things going on that day with the wind and things like that. But if she would have just said like, hey, is there anything you're feeling insecure about or anything you want me to look out for? I usually phrase it like that. Is there anything you want me to look out for? And I always tell them, like, I'm really insecure about this side of my face. I do not like this side. I'm really a diva about it. So I always want to be on this side. And I'll say, do you have anything? Do you have a side preference? That's kind of an easy way to start, I think. But yeah, just because if I say like, oh, do you have a preference? They say, yeah, I really like my right side. And then if you take note and you say, okay, let's put you on this side, then they're like, oh, Katelyn was paying attention. I trust her, you know? So it starts to build that confidence in you.
I love that because I always tell people that it's kind of like your girlfriend, like hyping you up, making sure that you look your best while you're taking like Instagram pictures before a night out. And that's what we strive to do. I know that's what you strive to do as well. So
yes, for sure.
Yes.
Also, just a little side note with that. I always start with like very basic posing because I do want to make sure they look their best, but I don't want to be tearing down their confidence by like nitpicking in the beginning. Right. And so I start with like super basic, like I call it the regular or the grandma pose, you know, like, okay, you guys are just going to take a picture like your mom's taking it for your fridge, whatever. However you want to say it. But we just start with a normal pose because I think if you start with something really complicated and then you're like, okay, let me just move your arm here, actually lift your chin here and actually look, and you're like critiquing them, then they're going to be like, oh, well, I don't really know what I'm doing and like feel more insecure. So if you start with something really easy, and even if they mess it up, you don't tell them they mess it up. Exactly. And you just say, this is amazing. Like you said, be their cheerleader. Then they're like, oh, okay. And you can kind of see them start to relax like, okay, I can do this. And so just even if they're not completely perfect, make them feel like that in the beginning to continue to boost their confidence.
Right. Because even if that first pose isn't like your absolute favorite, you have an hour, maybe even 2 hours for some sessions to get like, you know, those blog headers, those Instagram worthy shots, the ones that they're going to frame and put on canvases and such.
Yes, for sure.
Yes. Yeah, they don't need that first picture.
No. And I always tell them to. I'll be like, these ones are just practice, you know, and like, yeah, I'll probably keep them, but we don't have to, you know, it's just to kind of warm them up and make them feel more comfortable.
Exactly. Oh, I love this. Okay. What else do you have for us?
So many things.
So many things. I'm soaking it all in.
No, I love this. I think this is just such a cool topic because I think when people think posing, they think, okay, I'll go to my Pinterest and scroll, or I'm going to go look up a bunch of prompts and I'm going to do these really cheesy, like whisper, sexy, cereal voice, whatever, which if you do that, no offense, like people do that. It's cute. It's fine. But they just want a list of like prompts to say to couples. And it's so much more than that. It's making them feel confident. It's making those connection points with them. You don't want them to feel awkward at all at any point.
Yeah.
So one way to really help with that, and we talked about you wanting to have a plan, having a posing flow really helps with that. I don't know where this term came from. I don't know if I made up the word posing flow. If someone else made it up, tell me. But it's just the easiest way for me to think of it. Yeah. And it's basically just flowing from one pose to another pose to another pose with just very subtle changes, very subtle prompts. So if you're someone who you do need a plan and you're worried about freezing up at your sessions, creating your own posing flow really helps. Because if you get them into a perfect pose and you're like, okay, you guys smile at me. And then you're like, okay, great. Crap, what do I do now? And then you like move them to another spot. But if you have a posing flow, Then you could have them smile at the camera and then smile at each other and then kiss and then smile at each other afterwards, lean in for a forehead kiss. And just as quickly as I'm talking, you guys could be posing from pose to pose to pose.
Exactly.
And that does a couple of things. One, it helps if you're in a time crunch, if you're in a wedding and you don't have the portrait time that you thought you were going to have. You guys heard it took maybe 2 seconds for me to say 5 different poses. So if you're in a time crunch, that really helps. And it helps your couple feel comfortable because you're not like, okay, let me reposition you here. Now let's walk over here and reposition you here. So it makes them feel more comfortable, and it will make you feel more confident because if you need a plan, you can be like, okay, after I do this pose, I go right into this and right into this. And it kind of comes as second nature, I think.
Absolutely. And this is totally not the point of this episode, but it also helps with your videographer relationship.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Yes. So Devin is a videographer for our other brand, CSC Photography. And we've gotten into a point where our posing, we just tell our couples to interact. Like if we are not like in between like little poses, like so we're, flowing, of course. But if they don't hear us, because I'm kind of soft spoken, like don't just like stop and be like, what'd you say? Just like keep interacting, do like little cheek kisses, forehead kisses, like anything. If we need something, we will tell you again. And that kind of like movement based, just like the one pose to the next without breaking it up, your videographer will be your best friend on a wedding day. They're gonna love working with you.
Yes, for sure, because they really want that movement. I also will sometimes just be like, okay, you guys love each other. And I wouldn't do that in the beginning of the session by any means, because they would be like, we don't know what to do. But once you've already done those like basic poses, your core poses, and then they're feeling more comfortable with each other, that's when you can do things like that. I also, after I've gotten my basic poses, I'll add in some fun poses and some movement poses and things like that. That could look like just saying like, hey, you guys love each other for a minute. Or that could look like, you guys, if you're at an engagement session, practice your wedding dance. Sometimes if they just need a minute, I'll just let them dance, maybe play their song. And that just kind of makes them relax. And you want them to remember this experience as a fun experience. And you want them to look at the pictures and be like, oh, I remember how sweetly he was looking at me, or I remember how I felt in that moment. Exactly. And so any way you can like encourage interaction like that, I think is great. Even if it's just like walking, okay, you guys walk and smile at me and smile at each other and, act like you're going on a date and you're walking down to the movie theater or whatever, like just kind of encouraging that movement and getting all of those movements in between that happen organically, I think is really important.
Absolutely. And that encourages such genuine, authentic images as well. Because you can pose any couple and be like chest to chest, let's, go nose to nose, and it's going to look the same for couple A, B, and C, but nobody is going to walk, dance, just interact with their significant other the same way as the couple before or the couple after them. So I love that.
Yes, exactly. I am guilty. My favorite pose is when they're facing each other, their belly buttons stay together, their foreheads are closed. Their foreheads are closed. Their eyes are closed. Their foreheads are together. You know what I'm talking about. And I just love that because you can back up and get like really big composition, just beautiful. But that was the pose that I would get to the end of my session. And I'm like, I have them in this pose 45 times. Yes. And they're not going to print that one in their house because you can't see either of their faces. They're not I still love that pose. If you look down my Instagram, you can see it many times. I still love it. Yeah. Still love it. But I've realized that they want those more organic interactions. They want, like, if their arms are around each other and he's squeezing her and tickling her a little bit and she's laughing, like she remembers, oh, I was laughing in that moment, They want those, like you said, those things that are setting them apart and are really showing their love story.
I love that. And I know that people can't see me either, but I'm totally pointing at myself. I'm guilty of the forehead to forehead, nose to nose.
It's so pretty though,
It's so pretty. Just get like a little bit of foreground, back them up, nice glow.
Yes.
Yeah, so good.
Oh,
I love it.
Yeah, you said they can't see us, and I'm like talking with my hands the whole time. It's really hard with posing because you have to see, and that's why with my posing course, visual. I love that you can watch like a full engagement session and you can watch us pose because it's really hard. That's why today I wanted to talk more about like kind of the mentality behind it and like how you approach it because you can't see the poses. You can't see me talking with my hands, which is hard.
I love that. We've started filming our like weddings and engagement sessions like in a behind the scenes aspect. And I'm like, I just want to show this to everybody. Like
Yeah. Well, it's so important because you don't realize, and there are so many things that come into posing that you can see when you watch us behind the scenes, and things like my inflections or like the words that we use, or like how, because I can say be their cheerleader, but if that doesn't come naturally to you, then watching someone else do it kind of helps. There's this one part where I talk about building confidence in the course. And so there's like cuts of ways that I do that. And I can't tell you how many times I said perfect or cute. And I'm like, oh gosh, when you put them all together, it sounds obnoxious, but just ways that you can encourage them. Anyways, that's
like
a side
broken
tangent.
record to say perfect.
Yes.
It's like 50% of the session is just me saying perfect.
Yes. I need a new word. I remember my wedding photographer's word was rad. And I'm not that kind of person that would say rad. She's like, that's rad. I'm like, okay, not really. But everybody has
people
that.
People don't say rad anymore either.
No, which I guess is unique for her, but
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. What else? Do we have more points? Are we running out of time? I
don't know what time it is. I feel like I could talk about this all day.
We're good. Yeah. Same.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Another encouragement is just that it's okay to kind of prep for your session. And if you need to have something that you're scrolling through, if you want to save some poses, we have a pocket posing guide in our course. And it just like you can see a bunch of different poses like in a screenshot. So you can like screenshot it on your phone. And that's helpful because there are times when you blank, even if you have a really solid posing flow, even if you have a list of poses for adding movement that you want to incorporate, we all get to there and think like, oh, well, there was something else I wanted to do. So if you are doing 2 outfits, they go to change their outfit, have something on your screensaver and like glance over. And don't be afraid to kind of take a minute to look over that. You don't want to be scrolling through Pinterest in the middle of your session for 10 minutes. But that's something that could be helpful too, to just make sure you're incorporating new poses.
Right. And I love a game plan. I love a game plan. But I think that I'm also really big on permissions over here, like permissions to just like not know all of the answers like at all times, right? So having that pocket posing guide is great because you've done the prep work beforehand. It's not like a frantic, I'm scrolling because I don't know what else to do. It's more of I know that I want to do like this specific thing, or maybe like this is an advanced shot that I know that I want, and it helps give you a little bit of clarity, like make sure that you don't forget it and you're going home with those like happy shots.
Yeah, for sure.
And a better gallery for your couples.
Yes. And don't be afraid to ask your couples what they're looking for or ask for inspo. I think in the beginning of my photography journey, if someone were to like send me their Pinterest board or send me like their inspo, I would be like offended. Like, oh, don't you trust me as an artist, you know?
Right.
But now recently I've had some girls that will send me like, oh, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And it's really fun for me to kind of match what they're envisioning. And so that could give you some new ideas as well. And don't be afraid to do that. So it doesn't mean that they don't trust you. It means that they trust you even more to kind of fulfill their vision.
Yeah. I love that. Trust you even more. I love it.
Another thing just to mention, I know I've mentioned my course a couple times just because I'm excited about it because we just launched it this week. Yeah. But I do have a free posing guide. So I'm hoping you can put that in the show notes.
Absolutely.
My husband makes fun of me because I forget which is show notes and which is link in the description, but this is show notes, right?
This is show notes. YouTube is linked in the description. Yeah, I do that too.
I think in one of my first YouTube videos, I was like, can you put that in the show notes? And he's like, there's not show notes on YouTube. Yeah. Anyways, I have a free posing guide, and that shows like a sample posing flow. Cause like I said, it's kind of hard when you're not visualizing things. That shows a sample posing flow, and it shows some bonus fun poses, and just like a little behind the scenes. So I wanted to make sure that your listeners have that because that's really helpful.
Absolutely. I have that on my notes for like a little wrap up. So I
okay, great. Yes. I don't know if I jumped ahead. I feel like we've talked about everything.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything else, like any other questions, or has this been too short? Okay.
No, this is great. I mean, we're hitting about like my normal timestamp. So
okay.
I don't want to cut you off because all of this is fantastic. So
yeah, I think it's been great. Are there any other questions or any other that you're like, we really need to talk about this?
No, I think I know about your course. I know about your fun little freebie that we're going to link in the show notes and not in the description, right?
Yeah.
Where else can people find you?
Instagram is my thing. I try to be cool and be on TikTok, but I'm just not there yet. But yeah, Instagram at Katelyn Workman Photography. That's where you can find me most. I'm also on
Katelyn.
Yes.
Different spelling than mine. I always spell my Instagram handle. So I'm like, there's
that's smart.
20 billion ways to spell Katelyn.
Yes, mine's like Kate Lynn without the extra N. So that's how it should be spelled, I think. But
yes.
When
we'll put that in the show notes too.
Yeah. When I was in elementary school, I had 3 Catelyns in my class and we all spelled it differently. But anyways, yeah, Instagram, I'm there a lot. Or YouTube, it's just Katelyn Workman. We have free videos every week and there's a lot of behind the scenes posing stuff there too. Yeah, or my website. You can put all that there.
Yeah, I will put it all in the show notes.
Yeah, if you guys are listening and want to find me on Instagram, just send me a DM and let me know you listened. Caitlin and I were just talking about this, keeping up with DMs, but I love DMs. I love chatting on Instagram. So you guys can just shoot me a message and let me know if you have questions there. I would love that.
Yes, and she is so sweet to DM with, so definitely take advantage of that.
This has been great. If you guys have questions, let me know. I love this stuff. Thanks so much for having me, Katelyn. It's been really fun.
Thank you so much for being here. This was fantastic. A lot of value for our listeners.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh. Okay. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow Katelyn Workman on Instagram at Katelyn Workman Photography and snatch up all of those free goodies in the show notes, not the description.
Yes.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.